You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Welcome back to On the Way Home, the podcast where we explore the people, policies, and ideas shaping housing and belonging across Canada. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly, and today we're talking about a question that feels increasingly urgent for families across Canada. What happens when rent rises so high that there's little left for food, transportation, or other essentials? I'm joined once again by Neil Hetherington, CEO of Daily Bread Food Bank. Neil has long been a leading voice in the fight against poverty and food insecurity, but increasingly his work has also become deeply connected to housing affordability. Daily Bread is now championing a bold new idea, a federal rent relief tax credit aimed at helping low and modest income renters manage rising housing costs before they fall into deeper poverty or homelessness. Thanks, Neil, so much for joining us again on the show today. Today, you get to answer what home means to you in just one word, since you've joined us before.
Oh, I only get one word. Then that one word is going to be comfort.
Amazing. So today, we'd love to hear about what's going on in your space. And for our listeners, I'll just start by saying that the Daily Bread Food Bank is best known for addressing food insecurity and advocating for an end to poverty. Could you share what's led the organization to champion a federal rent relief tax credit? And why is housing affordability now such a critical part of your advocacy work?
Well, it's because we're mad. We're angry. We're angry at the fact that now 1 in 10 Torontonians has to make use of the Daily Bread Food Bank. We're mad that we have close to 1 million meals coming out of this facility behind me every single week feeding the city. We're mad that there are 1 in 4 Canadians who are food insecure. And so we also know that we have a choice at that point. You can be mad or you can do something about it. And what we choose to do is something about it. And there are 3 things that we work very hard for, and I'll get to the housing as the last one. The first one is, how do we decrease precarious employment? And there's ways that the federal government can do that and encourage full-time employment that has benefits, that type of thing. The second thing is income security. Right now, if you're on disability, you receive about $1,400 a month, and we should not be treating the most vulnerable in our society as poorly as that. And the last one is affordable housing. People come to food banks because they are paying way too much on their rent. And so, here's a stat that always astonishes me is close to 1 in 4 food bank clients pay 100% of their income on rent and utilities. And they absolutely everything, whether it's transportation, food, clothing, everything has to be achieved by friends, family, and charity because they are spending 100% of their income on rent. So we can do something about that. And our latest, and so getting finally to the question that you asked, what we're advocating for right now is that for low-income families, their rent or portion of their rent be tax deductible. There's a group of folks who are between 19 and 44. They're college educated and they have a job. And that is the fastest growing group of food bank users. And so you think about, well, what are they spending their money on? They're spending their money on rent. And can we target that group and allow them the opportunity to save, $500 or $1,000 of the first, couple $1,000s that they spend on rent? Can that be a tax deductible item? And from a moral perspective, from a human rights lens, we don't pay taxes when it comes to education. We don't pay taxes when it comes to healthcare. Why are we paying tax on rent, the very basic necessity that everybody has?
Could you explain how the proposed rent relief tax credit would work? And I know you talked about who would benefit most, but maybe for those of us who don't have full understanding of how this would impact.
Yeah, that's, I think, the beauty of this proposal is it's simple. And so what we want the government to do is say, okay, well, what's the target income that you want to support? And so let's say it's for people that have an income less than $40,000. Then how much are you allowing them to have as a tax deductible expense when it comes to their rent? And the government might say, listen, we can afford to have the first $500 of their annual rent be tax deductible, or maybe the first $1,000 or 2,000, and they'll be able to adjust that number based on the budgetary constraints that the government has. The government is good at being able to provide tax credits. Think about just a few years ago, there was a tax credit if you had a newspaper subscription. You got your first $250. Hey, so how do you want to? Are we able to edit or?
Yes, yeah, I took note of the timing, so we'll just have him clip together. I don't know if
Okay,
you,
perfect.
yeah, okay, go.
Just go. I don't. And maybe if we could start with
Refresh
answering
the
a
question.
question. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry. Okay, you were sharing how the proposed rent relief tax.
Okay.
Okay, Neil, can you share with us how the proposed rent relief tax credit would work? You did share that families would benefit from it the most, or let's
Yeah.
start again. Can you please explain how the proposed rent relief tax credit would work and who would benefit from it the most?
Well, that's the beauty of the proposal. It's straightforward and it's simple. The government would say, listen, who's the group that we want to support? And maybe that's individuals who are making an income, I'm just pulling this out of the air, of $40,000 or less. Then they would say, how much rent in their annual rental payments would we allow them to have as a tax deductible expense, as a tax credit? And the government might say, listen, we can only do $500, or we can do $1,000 or $10,000. They'll be able to adjust that based on the fiscal constraints of the government at the time. The government is good at being able to provide tax credits for things that they want to incentivize or for policy objectives that they have. You think about just recently, there was a tax credit for people who had newspaper subscriptions. They wanted to encourage people to support journalistic endeavors. And so they said, if you subscribe to the Globe and Mail, we will provide a $250 tax credit. And we want to do the same thing. But when it comes to something that's a fundamental human right, rent.
What are you hearing directly from Daily Bread service users about the challenges of balancing rent, food, transportation, and other necessities? I know you commented that a number are using 100% of their income on rent. Looking behind you, it does not seem that the operation is slowing at all. There's a ton of food. Can you tell us a bit about what you're hearing about on the ground and sector happenings right now?
Yeah, it's still the number one expense of any of the families that are coming to the Daily Bread Food Bank. The rents, on a positive note, have come down over the last few years. There's a 6% decline in Toronto last year. but they're still at levels where somebody who is making a decent income has to spend more than 30% of their income on rent. And so what we want to do is something that would allow for immediate relief that would come in the form of a tax credit, but also support what the government's doing when it comes to Build Canada homes. These are types of proposals that will start to see both the short term and long term tide change when it comes to how much people are paying in rent, and therefore able to purchase their own groceries at the grocery store, and then ultimately thrive in their community.
So the food bank usage has obviously continued at unprecedented levels, I'm hearing you say. And would you say, do we know a percentage of how much of that increase can be linked to housing costs, rising housing costs?
Well, we know that more than 85% of individuals who come to the food bank live in unaffordable housing conditions. And you're right, the numbers continue to increase at the food bank. But every once in a while, you got to have some silver linings. You got to have some hope. And here's a little bit of hope. What we're starting to see is that the number of Torontonians, the number of individual clients coming to the Daily Bread Food Bank, is starting to flatten. But here's the bad news. The bad news is that might be flattening, but they're going to have to come, they come to the food bank more often. So you can come to the food bank once per month, but in many cases, folks, sorry, I said once per month, once per week. So 4 times a month. People were coming maybe 1 time per month, and now it's 2 or 3 times per month on average. So that points to a deeper sense of challenge when it comes to their fiscal reality. They now need to rely on the food bank much, much more than previous.
Has Daily Bread already done some work around the data on what kind of impact you believe a federal rent relief tax credit could have on reducing poverty and preventing homelessness across Canada?
We have, and we partnered with the Matry Foundation to do that. And it really is dependent on the level and the amount of that the government would allow as a tax deductible credit. So if they said, listen, it's the first $500, it's going to have a very minimal effect. But if they said, listen, it's the first $10,000 or $15,000 of rent paid by a low-income individual, then it could have a profound impact on Canadians across the country.
And your advocacy efforts have successfully influenced federal policy in the past, including the Canada Disability Benefit. What lessons from that campaign are helping to shape this new initiative?
Well, I was really proud of the coalitions that got together to say it is fundamentally wrong the way we treat people on disability, and what we thought was going to be, even longer process came through and was budgeted. And last July, checks started to roll out to individuals who were receiving only about $1,400 per month. They received an extra $200, and that makes a huge difference for those families. There were a lot of lessons learned, but the fundamental lesson learned was that as Margaret Mead said, when a committed group of citizens comes together, that will change the world. And it started to change the world. And of my friend Bobby, who received his check last August and phoned me and said, today I got my check. And in his case, he was going to make a couple of purchases that he normally wouldn't. He was going to buy oat milk, was one of them, and I think the other one was some sort. Oh, he was going to buy one of those pre-made barbecue chickens, and he was really excited about that. And that was an opportunity he had that he otherwise wouldn't have on his very constrained budget.
I love that. Neil, do you think you can touch on a little bit? There's a lot happening in the sector. Tell us a bit about what's going on, and then maybe go into what role you think governments, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector each must play in addressing Canada's housing affordability crisis and poverty in general.
Well, for too long, we've relied on the private market alone to be able to deal with housing, and the private market is going to be the best ones to build housing. There's no question about that. But there are different types of housing that have to be constructed, and some of them require government intervention. If you were to go and a number of years ago and have a conversation with Prime Minister Paul Martin and say, are there any regrets that you had in the era where he was finance minister and Chrétien was prime minister? he would say the number one regret he had was that the federal government removed themselves from the development of cooperative housing. And, on a positive note, the deficit came down dramatically. But we're paying for that now, and I believe it'll take a couple of generations to deal with it. So, from a sector perspective, I'm grateful that the Carney government is putting $13 billion towards Build Canada Homes. I think we also have to be honest about the fact that even if they achieve their goals, it is still far short of what is required. So the government has a role to play. The private market has a role to play, and sometimes that's variable based on interest rates and whatever the market forces are at the time. I think that there are also rules when it comes to municipal government. How are they setting aside land? How are they reducing permitting times? How are they reducing development charges? These are all things that can be done if we want to be able to see a nation where everybody can afford to live in their community.
So if this tax credit were implemented tomorrow, what difference would it make to Bobby and in the daily lives of the individuals and families that Daily Bread serves?
Well, my hope is that they would have to come to the food bank less. Think about how inefficient it is. You're a single parent. You're already struggling when it comes to time picking up the kids after work and trying to get things organized as a family. And now you have to go to a grocery store to pick up what you can afford to pick up, and then you have to supplement that by going to a food bank. It's incredibly inefficient. It's incredibly difficult for that family. So my hope is that when we have this, and I believe it's a when we have this, that there will be an opportunity for people to be able to have their right to food realized.
Any idea why this hasn't been thought of before? It seems like it makes so much sense.
We do think that it makes sense. I mean, you look to our neighbors to the south, mortgage interest is a tax deductible expense. And that was to fulfill a policy initiative of the American government back in the 70s to develop and encourage home ownership. And so what did they do? They made mortgage interest tax deductible. We have the same opportunity here in Canada. And I think that it is best served to go to those that are in most need. And those that are in most need, we know are individuals who are attending the food bank and are paying such a huge percentage of their income on rent.
As we wrap up this show, Neil, can you share with us what gives you hope when it comes to addressing housing affordability and poverty in Canada, and what can listeners do to help support meaningful change in their own communities?
Well, I have hope. I have a tremendous amount of hope. I mean, the fact that you are talking about this week in and week out on this podcast is hopeful, because it's going to inspire people to raise their voices and use the concerns that they have about the lack of affordable housing or the lineups at food banks. They will use that and use the data from that in order to formulate good policy. And then I do have hope that, at all three levels of government now versus, even 5 years ago, all three levels of government are talking about affordable housing. That wasn't the case before. It is a kitchen table topic. And when that becomes a kitchen table conversation, then it becomes a conversation for elected officials. And if they want to keep their jobs, they're going to have to do something about it. So there are policy opportunities ahead. And for that, I'm very hopeful.
Thank you so much, Neil, for joining us on the show today. So appreciate your insights, and most of all, what you and your team are doing tirelessly to continue to fight against poverty in our country and in Toronto.
Thanks so much.
Take care. Today's episode featured Neil Hetherington, CEO of Daily Bread Food Bank, whose leadership continues to highlight the deep connection between housing affordability and poverty. The conversation explored how rising rents are driving food insecurity, why Daily Bread is advocating for a federal rent relief tax credit, and what policy solutions could help prevent more Canadians from falling into crisis. Neil's perspective serves as a powerful reminder that housing and food security cannot be addressed in isolation, and that meaningful solutions require coordinated action across all sectors. Thank you for listening to On the Way Home, a podcast brought to you by Blue Door.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.